For those who had real life celebrity encounters, who was rude and who was actually nice? Tony Hawk, late 90s. He came to our local scatter park for a demo, but it was a tiny little indoor park and he couldn't do much. After skating for a bit to appease the crowd, he snuck out the back across the parking lot to the bowling alley. Me and 2 friends followed him. He invited us to bowl with him, bought us chicken tenders and french fries and talked about skateboarding with us for over an hour. Honestly, one of the coolest guys I've ever met. Fast forward 20 years later and I get to meet him again at our local scatter park unveiling that his foundation helped pay for, and man, he was just as cool. We chatted a bit at the water fountain. I mentioned that as a kid he treated us to chicken tenders and french fries at the bowling alley when I was just a kid. And wouldn't you know it, he was like Owen Amity City. Wasn't the scatter park called B17? I was simply floored. He went on to explain he was having a rough day that day and just hanging with 3 little kids bowling and talking skateboarding made him realize just how great life was. Thank you for everything you have ever done for skateboarding, Tony. Dude, I would freak the frick out if I ever met Tony Hawk. I never really skateboarded, but I was fricking obsessed with the sport. Hawk was and still is my favorite professional athlete. Super stoked to hear that he's the fricking man. Met Viggo Mortensen quite a handful of times as he used to go to the restaurant I managed at the time. He was one of the nicest, most down-to-earth celebrities we had. He would, after we offered, join us for dinner once the restaurant had closed and would bring small gifts every time for everyone. I've heard he's genuinely decent, which makes me happy since I love his acting. I have 2. The first is Jerry Springer. I met him while traveling when we happened to be staying at the same hotel. He was super nice, took photos and answered questions. All smiles and jokes. The second is Steven Spielberg. I met him at some benefit I got invited to as a teen due to having good grades or some crap, and he not only had a super normal convo with me, but when I told him where I really wanted to work, but hadn't been able to get an interview, he took me to the next table where the company's CEO was and introduced me. Worked there for 5 years after. Hot dang. I'd buy a ticket to every Spielberg movie after that, even if I didn't want to see it. Bruce Campbell. Awesome dude. He signed my Army of Darkness poster. Stay groovy. Ash. Andre 3000. This was over 15 years ago. When I was in high school, I worked a local family-owned plant nursery. Andre, his wife, and their then baby boy used to come in and shop almost every weekend. He was a super nice guy. One time, he bought an entire pallet of sod. He had a brand new Lincoln Blackwood pickup truck, and the pallet wouldn't fit in the bed with the forklift, so I had to load it by hand. He went in, bought a pair of gloves, came back out and helped me load it. Also told me that he was going to go home and lay it out by himself. Kind of shocking considering how much that guy is probably worth. Something that didn't strike me at the time, that I now realize as an adult, was how good of a father he was. His son was just a baby, but man did he love that baby. Every time he would walk up to put a piece of sod in the bed of his truck, he would peek in the window and make a face at his son sitting in the back seat. The kid would cackle like a banshee. After we finished, he gave me a $100 tip, which, to a 15-year-old in the early 2000s, was a ton of money. Truly a stand-up guy and a very talented artist. Met Mr. Rogers years ago in a drugstore. He was super nice to the several people that had been quietly following him around the store. His wife, on the other hand, seemed annoyed with it. We never deserved him. Stone Cold Steve Austin found my dog that ran away and picked him up off of the highway. He ended up cleaning up our dog and gave him tons of toys before we got him back. If you want your dog back, give me a heck yeah. Rob Lowe. Met him at a kid's party. He's related to a kid that was at my kid's daycare. Awesome guy. Very friendly. Jay Leno. I've met and observed him at the rock store many times. Always a nice guy. Friendly. Love the guy. This is, literally, the most uplifting news in the history of mankind. Chris Hemsworth and Scarlett Johansson regularly frequented the restaurant I work at for a bit, and they are both genuinely awesome people. Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis were way too preoccupied when they came in to even acknowledge my presence of trying to wait on them. My friend's partner's best friend is the Hemsworth brothers' mum's godson and they have hung out with the fam a couple of times. through that very reliable link and via the one conversation we've had about it, I can report I have heard nothing but good things about the Hemsworths. I once spilled a very large, very colorful drink on Kate Hudson. My girlfriend and I ended up in a VIP area at a music festival totally by accident. We weren't supposed to be there but walked right in not knowing it was restricted, and since we were there we decided to stay. We ended up in a corner as to not draw attention to ourselves, and I would walk over to the bar occasionally to get us drinks and bring them back. A few hours and more than a few rounds later, my girlfriend decided she had to have one of the plastic yard glasses of margaritas that they were selling. So I attempted to bring back one and a few beers on my next trip. I made it within 10 feet of where we were stationed when I sidestepped a dancing girl, tripped, and spilled the entire yard glass on a woman. When she turned around, I realized that the woman that I had just soaked was Kate Hudson. She was incredibly awesome about it, and luckily my girlfriend had an extra shirt with her that she could change into. A coworker noticed Robin Williams flipping through a book quietly at a bookstore I worked at. It was during the filming of Good Will Hunting, so he had a beard and wasn't so recognizable. She said, "I think that's Robin Williams." He looked up from his book, smiled, and then put a finger to his mouth. SHHHH. I know. I had to deal with Cyndi Lauper as a hotel worker, and she was a complete B to me because there was a light bulb burnt out in her room. Back in the early 90s, Keanu Reeves came to a Shakespeare play festival being put on by area high schools in the Berkshires, and he took a moment to come backstage and compliment my friend on his performance as Bottom in Midsummer's Night Dream. Sounds like a small enough thing, but it made my friend feel like a rock star. Have always been a Keanu fan ever since. Rory McCann, the Hound from Game of Thrones. He was in Sydney, and I figured I never get this opportunity any other time, so I went up to him. He was very nice and shook my hand. He didn't want a photo, but not a big deal, was just cool to meet him. And this was like a few days right after his chicken episode where he was like, "I understand that if any more words come pouring out your sea mouth, I'm gonna have to eat every freaking chicken in this room." He did an interview where he said fans ask him to tell them to frick off, and they both leave happy. Diane Keaton. I was with my husband and kids at the beach where she owns a home. She complimented our beautiful children and was very friendly. My husband didn't realize who it was until she was gone and I told him. Shared an elevator with Beyonce back in the early 2000s when she was doing the Destiny's Child farewell tour. It was my dad, me, Beyonce, and a hulking bodyguard. My dad, being my dad, didn't know who she was and assumed they were a married couple and gave the man crap about carrying all the bags himself. She laughed. He kinda giggled a bit and they looked at each other awkwardly. Then they hopped off the elevator and walked straight onto a tour bus with her face plastered on the side, at which point my dad asked, "Wait, who is that?" 5/7 would share an elevator again. As long as you're not sharing an elevator with Solange, you'll be safe. Jaden Smith wouldn't leave my store 30 minutes after we closed. Neither would his security guard, the girl he was with, or the 8 or 9 other girls that were clearly asked to stay at least 30 feet away from him. He kept saying, "Bro, it's cool. Don't worry, bro, it's cool. It's cool." Frick you, Jaden. There are about 20 people in this store that can't go home until you get your stupid entitled butt out of here. The next day he accused a hotel down the street of trying to poison him with ricotta in his crepes. I went through an airport security line with Keanu Reeves. He was super cool and open for about a 5-minute conversation. They had closed the line behind him, so it was really just the two of us for a bit. He was even good-natured when I asked if I could take a selfie with him. Good dude. Once we got through the line, a crowd gathered quickly and security whisked him away. I'm sure this will come as no surprise, but John Cena is one of the nicest and naturally awesome people in existence. He came to visit the new enlisted rec center they built for us back in the mid-zeros to do a meet and greet, while he was only booked to be there from 1,400 to 1,600. When we told him that most of the subschool students didn't get out class until then, he said he'd be more than willing to stay later. He hung out with all the guys who came to see him shooting pool, playing darts and Xbox, and pretty much signing everything and taking a ton of pictures. The dude is just a straight up class act. You can tell he is so genuine too. He does so much for people and is always nice. I don't think I have ever seen any bad press from him. I'll always remember the video of the time TMZ tried to get him to say something bad about a wrestler that had just come out as gay and it completely backfired and just showed how nice he was. Bruce Willis. I was a Nick taxi driver and I pick him up at a restaurant very late at night. He starts asking me all these questions about the long hours, how much a good cabbie makes a night, etc. He asks me if I am married, I say yes. Asks about my wife. I tell him marriage is great but we aren't together much due to the long hours I drive the cab. We get to his place, hands me $1,000 and says, now go take a week off and spend it with your wife. True story. Man, what a guy. I hope you took the cash and had a week with your wife, dude. David Beckham. I didn't know who he was at the time. I was staying at the Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong and Galaxy was there for an exhibition game. There were a lot of fangirls outside with posters and crap in the roped off area near the front entrance. I'm in the elevator and DB walks in. I give him a nod and he gives me one back. Then I ask him if he knows what all the commotion outside is. He just shrugs and says it must be someone famous staying there. We get to his floor and he gives me a wave goodbye and exits. My work colleague later tells me that Beckham is staying there based on the pics he saw the fans waving. I look up his pic online and realize it's the dude I was chatting with in the elevator. Nice guy. Emily of Evanescence was absolutely wonderful. Some friends and I waited after a concert for autographs, and prior to Amy emerging, the bouncer type guy laid out in no uncertain terms that we weren't to try to touch her. Well, one friend had depression and Evanescence was one of the things that got her through her teen years. So she broke down in tears when Amy got to her in the autograph line, and Amy just went in and gave her this giant, comforting hug. Hard to do since Amy is so tiny. She was fabulous. I saw her a few years ago and we weren't allowed to touch or have pictures with her, but I asked for an autograph to be made out to my dead brother who introduced me to them and she just gave me the biggest hug. Can confirm. Very tiny woman. I was waiting for an order in a bakery about 10 years ago. Paulie Shaw walked in, looked around and ordered the pies, then looked at me and said, look at all these treats. My life was complete. Many years ago, I was in a gallery with my girlfriend at the time, and she said, isn't that Lou Reed? I'd seen that guy at a lot of openings and in fact I'd mentally categorized him as that guy who looks like Lou Reed, but I realized, yes it was. So I told her this. He'd been walking to the door when we said this and had heard us, and he stopped by the door, turned around, crossed his arms and looked right at us. The message was clear, I'm leaving, so if you wanted to say something, now is the time. My girlfriend walked over to him and said, I just want to shake your hand. He said, put it there, and they shook hands and he left. It was really civilized and I always had a soft spot for him after that. R.I.P. Lou. I used to work in a cafe in a very small town in New Zealand around 10 years ago. Billy Connolly was doing a tour of New Zealand. His wife is a Kiwi and he's well documented as loving the place, and it was around the town I was working in. He strolls into my cafe 10 minutes before closing, asking if we're still open. I stand there dumbfounded, and just about swore in his face, thinking holy crap, you're Billy Connolly, of course we're open. He was an absolute delight, beyond polite, sat and chatted with a table of local ladies, and roared with laughter when they said he should have had his coffee for free. I could buy the place if I wanted to. Why wouldn't I pay for my coffee? He is everything I aspire to be as a human. Kind, jovial, hilarious, and clever. Saw Matt Damon at the Guinness Storehouse in Dublin. He seemed like he was doing his absolute best to keep a low profile, so we didn't go talk to him, but he certainly didn't seem rude. Bonus: one of my teammates from college met Ryan Lochte after a meet. Teammate was in his hotel room, just hanging out, and Lochte knocks on the door and asks to borrow their ironing board. They let him have it, and a few minutes later housekeeping comes by and asks to see their ironing board. Apparently Lochte had thrown his out the window and tried to take my friends to cover it up. They thought the whole thing was hilarious. So the perception that he's an immature moron is right on then. I once walked outside of my house to run and grab a coffee. As I was waiting at a crosswalk I began to recognize the fellow waiting in front of me. I said, excuse me, I don't know if you know this but you're John Malkovich. Then John extended his hand and said, indeed I am, and shook my hand. A kind gentleman he was. I once got a haircut next to Adam Sandler. I was like 11. I said hi and he sort of just glanced at me. I met Rob Dyrdek at an outdoor mall in his hometown back in 2011. At the time I was a huge fan and was even wearing a Dyrdek DC hat. He was there for a family member's birthday, so the whole family was with him. We casually went up to talk to him and he was very kind and respectful. He could see that my friends and I were skateboarders, so he stood and talked to us for a minute while the dads talked about boats and other dad things. People ran up for quick pictures, but he made us feel appreciated for supporting him. He left with telling me, "I like the hat, God bless," and they went on with their night. 14-year-old me couldn't be happier. He was as cool as he seemed. I've encountered a few celebrities from my days working at a popular casino. Gordon Ramsay was very polite and very nice to talk to. I left that interaction thinking, what a cool guy, quite the gentleman. Ricky Lake is adorable. I didn't even realize it was her at first, but once we caught on she sat down with us to discuss her weight loss journey and stayed for a good half hour. She was witty and charming. Such a delight. Charles Barkley was very down to earth. No entourage. No security, just came into our store to shop and very willing to chat and take pictures if you wanted. Brad Garrett from Everybody Loves Raymond. What a miserable guy. Would not acknowledge anybody with eye contact. Specifically asked us not to talk to him. And if you approached him to see if he needed any help, you got this death stare like you were the foulest piece of garbage. Oh, and as a bonus, the first celebrity I ever met was Liza Minnelli when I was a young boy. I remember she had a big furry coat and this little dog. The dog came over to play with me. She then came over and patted my head telling my dad, "You have such a cute little boy." Very nice lady. My first celebrity experience when I first moved to La was meeting Weird Al Yankovic. He came in to eat at the restaurant I was hosting at, and while his date was in the bathroom before they left, he was sitting in this lounging area we had. Being all of 18 and thinking I was playing it cool, I asked, "So, you working on anything new, like I knew him personally or something?" He just kind of shrugged and said not really, and was followed by another 40 seconds or so of awkward silence. He wasn't rude or nice. It was obvious he wasn't in the mood though, which I totally get now nearly 2 decades later. I met him at a meet and greet and he was very sweet and kind, but not the wild and crazy guy you expect him to be. I feel like if I had just met him and he wasn't famous, I would peg him for someone who was kind of shy and introverted. He probably wasn't being rude. He may have been genuinely uncomfortable. Bill Murray almost hit me with his car. He did that "I'm sorry" face people always make when they almost kill you with a car. Do I get a reward for having the most boring Bill Murray story? He almost killed you. He only stole some of my French fries. This cat is shocked that you haven't liked this video yet. Like it fast so they can calm down. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.